Hey, what is up, guys? Bluntcuts here. This is a Watcher of Realms video. Thank you so much for tuning into my channel. I really appreciate it. I've got Rygar up on the screen right now. He is the new Ancient exclusive Nightmarelord. He is a certified badass. I really do. I will say, I did a skills breakdown earlier today. I will have a link to that in the description of this video. And I feel like maybe a little bit overly harsh to Rygar. And I've seen a lot of other content. I've watched some other videos that have come out today. And I feel like a lot of people are kind of like, meh, on Rygar. I want to say unequivocally, I do think he's a good hero. I don't think that he is some overpowered lord, and I think that therein lies the problem, right? When we're talking about ancient exclusive lords, everybody's mind goes to Ingrid, to Praetus, to Valderon, and those heroes are a cut above, and they've also kind of changed the meta in a lot of ways. Rygar is not going to do that. He's not going to do that. I will say unequivocally right now that his lord bonus is not overpowered. He is an ancient exclusive lord in a faction that is already incredibly strong. And I think that had they released a hero that was on par with, say, Ingrid or Valderon or Praetus, then this faction would have become the dominant faction of the game. Obviously, they don't want that. They love their chaotics. They love their arbiters. Those are the pay-to-win factions, and they're not going to give the free-to-play Nightmare units a lord that's going to allow basically everybody to ascend, I guess, ultimately. Now, right or wrong, I'm not saying that that's justification or anything, but I think ultimately that is what this kind of comes down to, is they weren't going to make a faction that's already really strong even stronger by adding a lord that was going to really shift the meta. Ultimately, though, what they did do was release a hero that, while his lord skill is not game-changing, he is a really, really solid hero. He's a good hero. He brings a lot to the table, not just as far as his damage, but also via his utility. And I really do like him. I am going to be pulling for him. I don't have a lot to pull. I'm not going to be spending money on him, but I am going to be pulling for him on Saturday when his banner does become active. And so I am excited to see if I might be able to pick up a copy of him. I do think there is a lot of compelling stuff about his kit. And I think it would be nice to have a Nightmare Lord that was not a tank. As much as I love my Torodor. So with that said, in this video, I am going to be doing some damage testing. I did want to really hone in on the difference between Torodor and Rygar, and at the same time, track Rygar's damage progression, his output from A0 all the way to A5. Let's go take a look at the team. All right, so this is the squad that I did go in with. We've got, obviously, Torodor and Rygar. We've got Arrogance. We've got Sun Wukong and Twyla in there. Now, I wanted to obviously compare everybody to Rygar. So I tried to pick a selection of heroes from the Nightmare faction that I thought was going to be relatively representative. You may notice that Kigiri is kind of absent here. I kind of hate using Kigiri in Guild Boss 1. I feel like having Wukong in there is more than enough to get an idea of what the top tier damage dealer is going to look like compared to Rygar. Wukong and Kigiri's output is very, very similar, except that Wukong is a lot less cumbersome to use. And I will tell you, I am going to be doing some Guild Boss 2 testing, so if you are feeling like I should be including Kigiri in here because you want to see how he compares, then don't worry, you're going to get to see him. Kigiri will be in the Guild Boss 2 testing that I do tomorrow, so keep an eye out for that. But in this sample here, what we've got is obviously Wukong up at the top. We've got Twyla, who is a solid but not really completely top tier DPS. And then we've got Arrogance, who is an OG legend. He is amazing, obviously. But these are all heroes that we are relatively familiar with their output, so we're going to be able to get an idea to see how Rygar compares to them. As far as the testing is concerned, I started with all heroes at A0. I tested them at A0, A1, A3, and A5. At each of those awakening levels, I did 3 runs each with Rygar as the Lord and 3 runs with Torodor as the Lord. I took an average of the damage output for each hero at each awakening level, put that into a spreadsheet, got some results. I'm going to go show you the run right now. Then we're going to go over to the spreadsheet. We're going to talk some numbers and see how Rygar and Torodor do compare to one another. All right, guys. So I hope you enjoyed that. Let's take a look at the numbers here. In this table at the top, I have got all of the different averages that each hero did get based on their lord, so Torodor or Rygar, broken down by awakening. It's a lot of data. I'm not going to go through all of that data individually as the crowd breathes a sigh of relief. So what I have done instead is broken down the data into this table right here. So this table above me now is basically my heat map of the gains or losses in damage that each of the heroes in this comp did experience based on going from Torodor as the Lord to Rygar as the Lord. So obviously the red cells indicate a loss of damage. The green cells indicate a increase of damage going to Rygar. And as you can see, there's a couple of trends. I'm going to talk through a couple of things that I think are interesting about this data. So Twyla is obviously the first one right here. Twyla is all red. She lost damage across the board at every awakening level going from Torodor to Rygar. Another thing that is interesting about this is that for most of the other heroes, the magnitude or the difference between going from Torodor to Rygar was relatively small, even when they did gain damage. Twyla did not have a small shift. It's certainly not at A0 or A1, where Torodor was really doing a lot more for her. And I don't know if this is RNG or what, but I do think anecdotally it does kind of make sense. If she is getting an extra hit on her basic attack, or a chance, I should say, to get an extra hit, then she has an extra chance to proc the ranged blade, which is a massive damage increase for her. I don't know why I went down at A3 and A5. I think that that is likely more RNG than anything else, but you know, it's just supposition at this point. I really don't know. I'm just reporting the findings that I did have. The other thing that is interesting here is Arrogance experienced a gain across the board by switching to Rygar. Now, it varied based on his awakening level. Basically, it maxed at 4.45% increase at A1, and then the smallest was at A0 at 0.57%. At A5, he did have a 2% increase going from Torodor to Rygar. So that's something to note. I don't know exactly why that might be. I think those amounts are small enough that likely could just be RNG at that point. And I think that could be said for pretty much everybody, potentially with the exception of Wukong, who started out losing 1.5% damage at A0 going from Torodor to Rygar. However, he gained 0.61% damage at A1, and he doesn't actually get a damage increase from his A1. So I think that goes to show you there is an amount of randomness and variability for both of these lords that ultimately, because these numbers are all relatively minor differences, they don't really represent anything except for the fact that I think Torodor and Rygar are very, very close to one another as far as their lord bonuses are concerned. I'm a little surprised by that. If you saw my skill breakdown of Rygar earlier, where I did talk about his lord bonus, I did feel like Torodor's on paper was demonstrably better than Rygar's. That did not bear out in the data. So I think at the end of the day, Rygar is going to be a solid addition to the Nightmare faction. You can bring him. He is going to be a solid damage dealer as well. So if we want to look at relative damage to one another, I will go back to this sheet for 1 second here and just kind of compare the damage output at A5 here. And really, you can look at the other ones as well because it's all very similar. We're going to ignore Wukong, right? But if you look at the A5 damage output, Twyla did 121 million on average. Arrogance did 139 million on average. Rygar did 125 million on average. This is with Torodor as the Lord. It's all very close to one another. Now, Arrogance outpaced them. However, Twyla and Rygar both have defense ignore mechanics in their kit that they weren't really able to take advantage of because Guild Boss Nightmare 4 has very, very low defense. And so those defense ignoring mechanics don't really increase their damage to the extent that they will most of the time in endgame, like Guild Boss 2, like let's say like in Epilogue, GVG, things like that. Anywhere where there is a unit that does have very high defense, those defense ignoring mechanics are going to disproportionately help them relative to the damage that you're seeing on the screen right here. Now, if we're looking at the Rygar increases, you're going to see very similar numbers. Now, Twyla did a little bit less damage at 113 million, almost 114 million on average at A5. Arrogance did 142 million on average, which was very, very similar. He did 139 million with Torodor, so average 3 million more, not very much, only a 2% increase. And Rygar did 127 million at A5 when he was his own lord, versus the 125 million that he did when Torodor was the lord. All of these numbers are so close to their Torodor counterparts that I don't think that there is a demonstrable difference between the two. Now, one thing that I will say, there did seem to be a trend, with the exception of Twyla, of more damage with Rygar. It was a slight amount, but it was more damage. And considering the number of runs that I did do, I do think that Rygar probably does do a little bit more damage. His Lord bonus is a little bit more beneficial to these heroes in this specific circumstance. Is that going to bear out in Guild Boss 2? Is that going to bear out in harder content? I can't say based on these numbers. I am going to do more testing, though. I will be doing more Guild Boss 2 testing. I am going to try to duplicate this testing on Guild Boss 2. I was hoping that there was going to be a clear winner here at Rygar or Torodor so that I could test one or the other as the Lord, with Rygar obviously in the comp because I want to see how he does in Guild Boss 2. Now, because the numbers are so close, I do feel compelled to go and give this a try on Guild Boss 2 and see if I can't get a little bit more data to compare. So keep an eye out for that video, likely coming out tomorrow, which is Wednesday. I've got a couple more tidbits to kind of share with you here. Rygar, his percent increase for his awakenings, this is just for Rygar. I do have this table broken down again by the Lord bonus he was receiving, and we've got his percent increase going from A0 to the various awakening levels that I did test. So Torodor, he did gain 6% going from A0 to A1. He gained almost 23% going from A0 to A3, and he gained almost 36% going from A0 to A5. Now, keep in mind, he did start out higher and end up lower on Torodor. That's why the magnitude of the increase is lower on the Torodor side. However, on his side, when he was his own Lord, he did gain almost 8% going from A0 to A1, almost 31% going from A0 to A3, and almost 45% going from A0 to A5. Now, keep in mind, again, he was doing 2 million damage on average less when he was his own Lord at A0, and he was doing 2 million damage more on average when he was his own Lord at A5. So there was a bit of a swing there that is causing the discrepancy in these numbers, but it is not a very big difference, despite what these percentages might lead you to believe. Beyond that, I do have this table down at the bottom of the spreadsheet where I've broken down the gear that I did have on the different heroes in this comp. I wanted to provide that to show that I tried to get everybody relatively close. You can see there are some differences here. It's not all perfect, but it is relatively close. They were all in Warlord and Soulbound Arcana. By the way, I did test Rygar in Infernal Roar. It does seem like he's getting a 10 to 15% damage boost using Soulbound Arcana versus Infernal Roar, so that is something to keep in mind if you do pull him and you are interested in gearing him. I did have all of these units in triple attack percent pieces on the right-hand side. You can see the various attack levels here. Now, keep in mind, obviously, they have different base attacks. So just because Wukong has 28,423 attack versus, Arrogance having 22,394, there's a significant difference in their base attack, which they were all crit capped. Crit damage was close to 300% for each one. Again, I tried my best to get it close. This is as close as I could get. One thing to keep in mind, Arrogance does get 15% crit damage at his A2 rather than an attack boost, so that is why his crit damage is a little bit higher. Rygar, I couldn't get it any lower. That's the gear that I had on the test server, so he did have slightly better gear than the other units in this comp, but not significant. We're talking about maybe 15 to 20 speed, about 10% more crit damage. And on top of that, I do think he was using the worst artifact of the bunch here. So Sun Wukong and Arrogance did have their max exclusives. Each of those does give them a 30% damage increase. Wukong's also gives him 6% rage when he does generate a clone. Now, one thing I will say is that that is an advantage for Wukong, obviously, but it is an advantage that pretty much everybody does have because we were all just handed that artifact. So I'm not going to not use that and diminish Wukong when most people, almost everybody, does have access to that artifact. Twyla did have a max Scarlet Hunt. That, of course, does give 30% damage increase to bleeding targets. Her bleed was up 100% of the time on the boss. And Rygar was using the new artifact, the Max Shattered Hilt, which starts off with a 20% single target damage boost and scales up to a 30% single target damage boost after he attacks, after he hits 50 times, I believe is the way that it works. But either way, across the board, all these artifacts did provide a 30% damage boost, ultimately, with just the added caveat of Wukong getting that extra bonus. And I'd say on the other side of it, Rygar needed a little bit of ramp-up time before he reached that 30% damage bonus. So if you are interested in kind of comparing and contrasting, this info is in the sheet. I will have a link to this spreadsheet in the description of this video if you do want to check it out. Sound off in the comments if you have any questions about any of this data. I'd be more than happy to answer. I do appreciate you all tuning in. Please do like and subscribe if you do enjoy this video. Click that thumbs up button. Toss me a sub if you are interested in seeing more of my stuff. It really does mean a lot to me, so thank you in advance if that is something that you can do. I will catch you all next time.